back. This is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
And welcome back to Boomer Life on CIL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton, along with Maria Howard, who's joined us today. She's the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia. And we're talking about one of the challenges on the dementia journey. And I'm not sure if that's the right way to term it, but we're talking about wandering. Is it a challenge, Maria?
It certainly can be a challenge because people are anxious about the possibility of wandering happening. Can be experienced by a number of people, but it's not necessarily going to happen. But I think there is a heightened belief in sort of the myth of dementia and Alzheimer's that it does happen to everybody who has the disease. So I think it does cause people anxious worrying about it, and I think that then becomes a challenge.
A challenge. Excellent. I just wasn't sure if I was referring to it correctly or not. But I know our next guest is going to be able to speak to this directly from personal experience. We want you to say hello to Ellen Allen. Now, Ellen is a mom of 3, retired from the hotel industry, and she's here today because she's also been a primary caregiver to her mother, who was actually diagnosed with dementia. And a little bit of the background, and I'll get you to tell it in more detail, Ellen, of course, but her mother was living alone in Montreal, and it was only about 2 years ago that, after conversations with the surrounding neighbors and her mother's doctor, that Ellen and her sister actually realized this was no longer a safe environment for her mom to be living on her own. So they had to concoct a plan and move her to Vancouver. So Ellen, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's lovely to be here. And
now you get to tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, it has definitely been a journey. And just like child rearing, raising and spending time with a mother with dementia is very strange, and a lot of unopened doors and a lot of new information.
Sure. So I'm sure if we asked you 10 years ago what you would be doing today, this was probably not anything that was even on your radar.
Not at all.
Not at all.
So by way of background, my father passed away in 2008. My parents had been living in the same home in Beaconsfield for over 40 years. And then neighbors and the doctor, as you mentioned, had decided that it was not safe because my mother was forgetful. There was a concern that she might wander away in the wintertime without the appropriate clothing. And therefore, my sister Anne and I realized we needed to bring her to Vancouver.
You needed to do something more, because you'd sort of set up a little network to help look after your mom while you weren't around.
Very much,
correct?
Very much sort of without her knowing, because my mother was a very proud, physically very able individual.
Extremely independent as well.
Very independent, and really there was no discussion, and it was impossible to have a discussion with her about her diagnosis. And as far as she was concerned, we were the crazy ones, that there was absolutely nothing wrong, and she was perfectly fine in her environment. So in 2012, my sister and I, bought a one-way ticket for Mom to come to Vancouver, with the understanding that Mom would live in my sister's home. I was relatively new to Vancouver, and my sister's home being what we thought a familiar place for her. We recognized that familiarity was very, very important for somebody with dementia.
She didn't know she had a one-way ticket, though.
Absolutely not. She liked the idea of coming on vacation. Vancouver is a beautiful city. We brought her to Vancouver, as mentioned, and initially it was fine. But after several weeks went by, we recognized more and more that Mom needed to have one of us with her at all times, because if she was left alone, she would become very, very confused. My sister works long hours. She's a doctor, was on call. I had the flexibility and the time to stay with my mom during the day, so I would often visit with her. What started off for maybe 3 or 4 hours a day morphed into, from basically 7:30 in the morning when my sister left until about 7:30 at night, when my sister and family would return at the end of the day. And that in itself became very, very stressful for me. She needed the one-on-one conversation. She did not like it when I was on the telephone. She I hate to say this, but even if I went to the bathroom after a while, she would say, "Where did you go? Why did you leave me alone?"
Right.
There was an awful lot of anxiety there.
So you probably had no idea that your mother had progressed to this point, or that you were really assuming a role of primary caregiver when you moved her to Vancouver.
I did not think I had signed up for that. You're absolutely right. There were a lot of moments of frustration and anxiety, a lot of times of guilt, thinking, what have we done?
Yeah,
We've
for
taken
sure.
her away from her familiar her friends, etc. She didn't quite understand why she was there with us. At this point, she started saying, "Oh, I think it's time for me to go home again."
Yes.
She was the kind of individual that liked to be in control, particularly in control of her own home. She was a homemaker, even though she was a well-educated woman, but had made the choice to stay at home and look after us as kids. So all of a sudden, feeling like she was a guest did not sit well with her either. Sorry?
Yeah, that's okay. You found she was in a stressful situation. You were in a stressful situation. How did you eventually make contact with the Alzheimer's Society?
There were a lot of times when I just felt that I needed to have a sounding board, because I realized that it wasn't fair to my own family, that the stress that I was feeling, the guilt that I was feeling, even though my particular family was very supportive, but it was really, really nice. And there were times that I would call the helpline literally exasperated and in tears, because I felt like what I was doing was not enough. If I was spending 10 hours a day, I should be spending 12 hours a day. If I was spending 12 hours a day, I should be spending 14. If I was on the phone making a business call, for instance, the guilt when I was not one-on-one for her was immense. And so several times, as mentioned, I called the Alzheimer's Society out of just to have a shoulder or some sort of support, which was phenomenal. Fast forward to around the holidays, when we realized that Mom was becoming more and more and more dependent. It was also a time where our respective children were coming home from university, and the house was full. Mom, it was difficult for her to be the center of attention at that point. And I think then she started to pull back, and that's the time when she realized that I guess I'm not needed here. So there was her sense of insecurity. There was an awful lot of anxiety.
So you
I'm
watched
in the
her
way.
withdraw.
I watched her withdraw
Wow.
and we watched her feel basically constantly needing an awful lot of support. So the minute she couldn't follow the dinner conversation, she would say, "Oh, it's time for me to go home." So the minute she felt that she was a burden, which she wasn't, but the problem is she couldn't always be the focus of attention.
Right.
And
And did she ever have an instance of wandering, or would she get up and leave the room, or would she try to leave the house, or?
She did a couple of times. She would leave, and we'd say, "Oh no, well, let's go for a walk together," or "Yes, it's a beautiful evening." And so we always then would pitch in and sort of say, "Okay, let's take a walk together." We would definitely try to redirect, which was one of the strategies that the Alzheimer's Society had suggested to us. And it got to the point where it was also suggested that maybe it was time to get some additional support, get a companion. And we did work through a couple of agencies, and we understood my mom enough to know that she would never accept somebody to be there for her. So we tried to sell the idea that this companion would be there to support my sister, or to support me, or to help in chores around the house. That was not there for my mom. And
Did she warm up to the idea?
not at all. So
that's a very big challenge, just trying to find that extra assistance and that extra help that you need.
And I think because I was getting burnt out, but it always sounds great and it's a great theory, but my mom became very aware, or she had this sort of sense that, I don't need anybody in the house. And we would try to sell her on the idea that, no, Mom, this is for my sister who works long hours. It's to have somebody to help clean up the house, etc. It was just an extra set of eyes in some ways for the house, but it had nothing to do with my mom. But she didn't buy into that. And so what we found was that, great, we had this companion there that was fine if I was also in the house. And when we started running into the wandering or the running away situations, was if I would try to say, Mom, I just have to run an errand. I'm going to the bank, but that's okay. Christy is here, and if you have any questions. And the few times that I did leave, then my mom would say, well, then I'm leaving too. But she would wait till I was gone, and then she would go out the back door. And I absolutely do not fault the companion, because you can't watch somebody 24 hours a day the way. So the companion felt then guilty because my mom had sort of wandered, but that was just in the neighborhood.
Well, you know,
and that was not an issue.
Like you said, you can't have your eyes on them 24/7, but they need that help. They require that help. And the caregiver probably thought she was just wandering to the bathroom or up the stairs or to another part of the house, and you can't follow that person around like a lost dog all the time.
No, particularly because my mother was very, very suspicious of this companion.
Of course.
And she also thought, well, I don't need somebody to help me chop vegetables for the salad. I can do this by myself.
Yeah.
So there was a very, very fine line between watching her and then also respecting her independence and respecting my mom's independence in terms of her intelligence and her freedom, which is what she was used to having.
And you want to respect that, right? Or find a way to find that balance. So where is your mom now?
So my mom now is in a care facility. She's actually in a locked special care unit at a facility here in Vancouver. It was quite a difficult journey because at one point I was out of town and my mom had literally exited or gone through the back door of my sister's house at a time when she felt that she wanted to go home, and home was a place where she felt safe, that she was in control. Unfortunately, that trip, her going outside, ended up with my mom being on a bus at the east end, on the totally opposite end of Vancouver. My sister had looked in the neighborhood, could not find her, called me, as mentioned. I was out of town, and I said, we need to call the police. And that was incredibly stressful. The police, they were very, very supportive. And probably about 4 hours later, I received a phone call on my cell by a very nice gentleman. And getting back to what we were talking about, the community, he was a supervisor with the bus company here in Vancouver. And they had sensed that my mom was not where she should be. She was anxious. And the bus driver, just by the questions my mom was asking, the places that she was asking she wanted to go to, I don't know if he was from Montreal, but he recognized that these were not places in Vancouver. And the driver called the supervisor. They very gently took my mom off the bus at the next stop where the supervisor met her. He was very gentle with her. And basically, they found my phone number in the bottom of her purse. They called me.
Wonderful.
I then was able to call my sister, who was in Vancouver. They picked her up. But unfortunately, the situation sort of escalated from there, and it started happening on a more regular basis. And the third time that the Vancouver 911 was called, it was suggested that she needed more help. And at that point, she was admitted to the Vancouver General Hospital for some testing and ultimately,
yes.
And she is now where she is. And she's after a year and a half, she's settling down, and it's becoming her new home.
Yes. Well, it's an incredible story, Ellen. You've really hit home with the entire picture of your mom being on the bus and the support of the community, and thank goodness, hats off to that bus driver for knowing the right thing to do. And Maria, this just comes back to the point where we're trying to emphasize being aware, be a part of your community. If you see something out of place, it is an emergency. correct?
It's exactly that, and to that bus driver who, was asking questions and just trying to engage her in conversation, and the way, Ellen, you've said, they were very gentle with her and non-threatening is such an important factor too, right? Recognizing that, she might be scared, she might be anxious, and that's what is really so important, to have that safety net provided by the community.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Ellen, any advice to someone else who might find themselves in that position of primary caregiver? Is there...
Well, unfortunately, you're not alone. I'm speaking to many friends and colleagues and in our age group, and we're recognizing that this is actually quite a common problem. And it's scary not only for the patient with dementia, but for family members. There's an awful lot of guilt. You're wondering if you're doing the right thing. And I got an awful lot of support from the Alzheimer's Society, and I'm forever grateful to them.
Thank you for sharing your story. Be patient. It is a long journey, as you mentioned. You're listening to Boomer Life on CL 650 with Ellen Allen, our guest today, talking about caregiving for patients with dementia and the topic of wandering. And specifically, this was her mother. What more do we need to know, and what more can we do? That conversation is next. If you need more information, please visit the website, alzheimerbc.org. We'll be right back.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CIL 650.